Hello! Are you about to drain your central heating system using a drain valve? In this video, I'm going to show you the best way to use your drain valve and all the problems which I readily find when using drain valves. And of course, how to overcome those problems. So hopefully you'll be able to drain your system down knowing what you may find. After I've shown you all these problems you may be faced with, I show you everything that you need to do to fully drain your system, and things that you want to watch out for along the way. Now, these drain valve problems tend to be on older systems, so if you've got a newer system, hopefully your drain valve will work absolutely fine. Now, these problems which I'm going to show you with your drain valves, they can be a real nightmare. So much so that quite often I don't even use the drain valve. I use another method to drain the system down because I know that drain valve is going to be a real issue, potentially making a huge mess, and no one wants to be clearing up a huge mess. Now, like I said, I will quite often choose a completely different way to drain a system down. I'm not going to cover that in this video, but I have made another video on all the ways that I go about draining a system, especially if you can't find the drain valve. You'll find that video linked in the cards above now and also down in the description, where you'll find lots of other helpful videos all about your central heating system, like how to change a radiator valve without even draining your system, how to install smart controls, how to make your system just generally more efficient. So check those videos out down below. Right, now let's get on with these drain valve problems. So for whatever reason you want to drain your system and you're going to use your drain valve to do it. Now, your drain valve may be on your radiator valve like this one, but the most common drain valve will be on the pipework, usually at the lowest point of the system. Now, here's another style of drain valve. To use this drain valve, you need to make sure that the radiator valves are open, and then you remove the little white cap from the top there, and then you use a large Allen key inside the valve and just open it up, attaching the hose pipe to the outlet. Now, here's a drain valve that you will regularly find on the central heating system. Now, when you come to put your hose pipe on, always use your Jubilee clip. Now, I always put the Jubilee clip with the screw away from the drain valve shaft, which we're going to need access to in a couple of moments. Now, I say always use a Jubilee clip because if you don't, if you've got hot water or even cold, the pipe just might burst off like that, and then suddenly you've got water pouring all over your floor. So always use a Jubilee clip, push it on with the screw in the orientation I've got it now, and then do the screw up nice and tight because the hose pipes readily leak. Then I always use a small adjustable spanner, pop it on the drain valve and just undo it, and then your system should start draining. Now, before you go doing that, always put down a plastic sheet, put down lots of towels, make sure that you have something to catch water in because, like I said, this can be very messy. I will often fold the carpet back just in case there are any spills. And the old takeaway containers can be really handy to get underneath the valves because sometimes they're really close to the floor. Now, another thing to watch out for is water actually running down the hose pipe and dripping off somewhere else. So you might need to move the pot a bit further along to catch that water. And of course, run the hose pipe into a drain or part of the garden where no one's going to be walking, because this central heating water can be really dirty. So don't run it onto a driveway or a path or your patio because this stuff stains and it's really hard to get off. But before you start draining the system, turn off your boiler. Or if you have a traditional system or even a Combi boiler, it's always best to turn the power off to stop any chance of the pump or even an additional pump to start running, which could damage the pump. Now, if when you undo the valve, no water comes out, this can be down to several reasons. One of these reasons is you just need to wind the valve out just that little bit further, but the gland nut thingy is stopping the valve from winding out far enough and pulling the washer off the seating. So if you just remove the gland nut, you'll then be able to wind the valve out a little bit further, and hopefully that will then release the washer and the system will start draining. Now the gland nut thingy has been removed, you can now unscrew the valve that little bit further, and then hopefully your system's going to start draining. And you can always put it back on again once the system is draining. I'll explain to you in just a moment what this gland nut thingy actually does. Now here's two slightly different drain valves which you'll readily find on central heating systems. And this is the same as this one here because it's got that knurled gland nut on the end here. Now this is the other style which you'll find, and it doesn't have a gland nut at all. You can see that just doesn't fit on there. So to open this one, you just turn the valve on the end, but be careful because it will just fall out like that. And then you're going to have water spraying everywhere. The other downside to these valves is they leak continuously all the time you are draining the system because it doesn't have a gland nut thingy like the other valve does. So I'll just show you quickly how this gland nut thingy works. Now, as I undo it, you can see there's a black little O-ring in there, which seals against the edge of the valve. Depending on your valve is whether you'll have that O-ring in there. This valve doesn't have one, and I'm just screwing it back on again. Now, if I just remove that gland nut, you can see on the shaft of the drain valve, there's another O-ring. So that creates another seal, hopefully stopping any water from dripping when you're draining the system. So the idea of the gland nut is just to stop the valve from leaking when you are draining the system. Now, if your gland nut hasn't got a rubber washer on it, then you can just get a little bit of PTFE tape, just wrap it around the end of the gland nut, making like a little washer, and then you can just screw it onto your valve. And that will help prevent it from leaking when it's draining. Now, here's another problem which I regularly come up against when I am draining the system using the drain valve. Now, readily, when you undo the drain valve, the washer will stay stuck in the end of the valve like that. So you undo the valve itself and that washer just stays stuck inside there. So you can be undoing the valve, remove it completely, and hardly any water's coming out, and that's because the washer has pulled off the jumper and it stayed stuck at the end of the valve. And this does regularly happen. Now you can drain the system and leave the washer there. You could put back the screwed plug and maybe the gland nut, and the system may continue to drain with just that tiny little hole. But obviously that's going to take a really long time. So I would definitely try and remove the washer. Now, one method that I use to try and get this washer out if it's stuck in the end is I get a large screw, screw it into the washer, and then give it a wiggle and a pull, and then with any luck the washer will pull out. But of course, if you do that, you're then going to have water gushing out of the drain valve. But really, once you've started, you have no choice. And here I am on a job where I've actually just pulled the washer out by using that large screw. Now, another method which I would use is just a screwdriver, and I try cutting the washer, scraping around, and get that washer out of the valve. All the time that you're doing this, you're going to have water pouring out of that drain valve. So I always have my water vacuum, and I'll be sucking up all that water as it's pouring out. Now, why do the washers stay stuck on the end? Well, older washers may actually be a slightly different shape, and over time they can also just squash down into the hole. They go hard, stick to the end, making them tricky to get out. And you can see that this drain valve washer is a completely different shape, and it will easily stay stuck in the drain valve. Now I'm going to show you other problems that you can get with the drain valve washers. Now, I've been saving washers for some time and put them in this little bag just to show you what can happen when you come to drain your system and use your drain valve. I'm going to jump in here and quickly introduce myself. My name is Mark Ballard, and I've been a gas registered engineer for over 30 years. The aim of my channel is to help you with your gas boilers and your central heating. If you find this video at all useful, then please give me a little bit of feedback by clicking on the old thumbs up and subscribe. That will help others to find the video, and of course share it with anyone else who may be interested. If you visit my website, I have categorized all my videos on products and parts that I recommend, so you can easily find what you're looking for. And I'd like to say a really big thank you to everybody who's bought me a cup of coffee and left me a donation in my Toolbox fund. It's really appreciated, and it does really help me to make more videos which will hopefully help you. Now, over time, drain valve washers can go hard and brittle, and then when you come to drain the system, you undo the valve, and then the washer will just crack and break like this one. And again, they can stay stuck in the end of the valve with little bits just breaking off them like this. And once they've gone hard, you can't use them at all. Now here's a drain valve which is outside and it's been leaking. The homeowner has replaced the washer, but it's still leaking, so they give me a call to come and see what the problem is. So I've opened the valve, removed the gland nut. Now I can see that this is a brand new washer on the end of the valve stopper. It's nice and rubbery, so why is the valve still leaking? When I look up inside the valve, I can see that there's something in the valve. Now I spent some time fiddling around with my screwdriver trying to get it out. And there we are, that's what's in the end of the valve. It's the old washer. And that's why the valve was still leaking with the new washer on. So when you finish working on the system, before you do the valve up, make sure that there is nothing stuck up inside the valve. Now the seating of the valve is very important and we must make sure it is clean. I'll show you what I mean now. This drain valve has started leaking and the homeowners put a pot underneath it to catch the water. So I've removed the gland nut and now I'm removing the stopper. And look, where's the washer? It's still stuck inside. So I'm going to get a long screw it up inside there and see if I can pull the washer out. And after some time, this washer here comes out. There's not much left of that washer. Where's the rest of it gone? Now the most important thing to do is to make sure that the seating that the washer pushes up against is nice and clean and there's no other bits of rubber still stuck on the seating. So what I normally do is use a flat-headed screwdriver and just scrape around the seating, making sure that it is nice and clean and there's no other bits of the old washer still stuck on the seating. And there you go, I think I'm happy that that seating is nice and clean now. Now I can get a new washer, put it on the old stopper and screw it into the valve. And finally replace the gland nut. Now this drain valve is no longer leaking. A common mistake that homeowners may make is that maybe the drain valve starts leaking or maybe they've just drained the system. They close the drain valve and tighten it up, not realizing that the washer has gone hard, and when they tighten it up, the washer can then crack. It might not leak straight away, but it'll probably start leaking in the future. So if the drain valve washer isn't rubbery, always replace it. In general, whenever I drain a system with a drain valve, I'll always replace the washer anyway, because it's only a couple of pence and it's not worth the risk of having a leak in the future. So here's a drain valve that had been leaking and the homeowner had tightened it up and it made it worse. So they called me and when I removed the valve, this is what I found. The washer's gone hard, it's cracked, it's brittle, so it's absolutely useless. And with the new washer on, it was absolutely fine. Now another problem that may happen, not only may the washer stay in the end of the valve, but the jumper, which is on the end of the screw thread, sometimes pulls off and that stays stuck at the end as well. So it will look like this and you have no water coming out because the jumper and the washer are firmly stuck to the end of the valve. Now the way that I fix this problem is I get a large flat screwdriver like this, put it down inside the valve and then lever against that little pin which is sticking out on the jumper. And you just got to give it a lever and a wiggle and then hopefully the washer will release from the seating. But just bear in mind, if you do this, you're suddenly going to get water, which may be really dirty, come gushing out of the valve. Now you can try using a pair of long those pliers and pulling it out, but in general I find that doesn't work because you just can't grip it tight enough to pull it off the seating. Now the final thing which I sometimes come up against when trying to drain the system with a drain valve, and this is most likely to happen when the drain valve is pointing straight downwards like this one, is that the drain valve will work absolutely fine. So I undo the valve, the washer releases, everything undoes properly, and yet no water comes out. And that would be because of a blockage. Because the valve is facing downwards, little bits of magnetite gradually build up until it finally blocks the valve completely. And then the only thing you can do then is to remove the plug and use something pointy, again like a screwdriver, push it up into the pipe and clean out that magnetite. Once again, as soon as you do that, water's going to come gushing out and it's going to be filthy black. Just to demonstrate that, here is a drain valve which is pointing downwards. I'm not going to bother to use it because I know that it's going to be completely blocked and it's a complete waste of time trying to use it. So instead, I've already drained the system using a different method, and now I'm just cutting through that pipe. I'm going to replace that bit and make it a much better design. And there we go, a new radiator fitted with a drain valve in a much better position. Now we know all the problems that we may have to deal with. Now let's get on with draining the system. So we've opened our drain valve, it's working properly, and the water is draining out of our system. As I said earlier, make sure that the power is turned off so no pumps can start running. With the combination boiler, make sure that the power is off, and then we can start opening bleed valves on the radiators. Starting with the radiators at the top of the house and the tallest radiators, so say a towel rail, open that bleed valve first and then gradually work our way around the system. If water starts coming out instead of air, then we just close the bleed valve and wait for the system water to drop down a bit and then open it again. And then you should hear air being sucked into the radiator as the radiator drains of water. Now this can take a long time, so sometimes I even take the bleed valve plugs out because that just speeds the whole process up. But be careful because sometimes they can just drop out on the floor. And of course, don't lose them. And like I said, you work your way around this system, opening the bleed valves until every radiator is then open, and then hopefully all the water is out of your system. If you've got radiators like this, where the pipework comes down the wall, you'll have to drain each of these radiators individually. But if you just want to work on one of those radiators, then you don't need to drain all the others. Now, if you have a traditional system with a loft tank, so this is a F&E tank, that's feed and expansion tank, we need to turn the water off to stop the tank from constantly refilling and basically just constantly refilling the central heating system. Now here's a tank for demonstration purposes, and I've got the outlet bunged up. So I'm going to remove the bung, which is the equivalent to opening up our drain valve. And now the water's going to start dropping in the tank, and then you'll see that float valve will open up and start refilling the system. And there we go, we can see the float valve has opened up now and it's refilling our system. Now sometimes you'll have a stopcock in your airing cupboard, so you can isolate the water going to the loft tanks. Or there may be an isolation valve on the pipework going into the loft tank. But I very often won't use these because when you close them, they then might start leaking, and then that's something else you have to fix. But a very easy method to use is just to tie up the float valve. So just get a piece of wood like that. I then use a piece of solder because it's nice and bendy, and I just wrap it around the float valve, and then I just wrap it around the piece of wood and tie it off, pulling up the float valve nice and tight so the water stops coming out and filling up the system. And there you go, the float valve is now tied up and it's no longer refilling the system. Just make sure it's nice and secure and there's no chance it could maybe slip along the valve, because you don't want to be working on your system and then all of a sudden water starts coming out because the valve has slipped and it started refilling your central heating system. Now I've used a different method here to keep the float valve closed. Now, another thing to consider is that these tanks can be full of dirty water and all sorts of yucky, sludgy stuff. So rather than draining all that into your central heating system, it's a good idea to clean it out before you actually drain it. So empty it completely and clean the tank. Now you can see I'm using my water vacuum here and I'm sucking up all that kind of weird sludgy stuff which is in the tank. And we definitely don't want that running down through our central heating system. Now I'm just giving it a good old clean out with a sponge. And there we go, we got a nice clean tank now. When you finish your work, all you need to do is to remove whatever you've got, keeping the float valve closed. And the system will start to refill. Another method which I regularly use is to use bungs like this. So I would bung up the feed pipe. And that will stop the system from refilling when I'm working on it. Now I regularly use bungs to bung up the loft tank so I can carry out work without draining the system down at all. And of course I made a completely separate video all about how to use these bungs to get the best results so you can carry out work on the system without draining it down, which obviously saves hours of time. You'll find that video linked in the cards above and in the description. Now another thing to consider when draining your system is if you have zone valves or mid-position valve, you might want to manually open them to make sure that the circuit is open and all the water has drained out of that circuit. Otherwise, the valve may be creating an airlock and all the water may not have come out of that part of the system. Now, all motorized valves work slightly differently, but usually they'll have a lever on so you can lock them partially open. So push the lever across and clip it into the manual open slot, and then that keeps the valve half open. To close it, you just release it from its position, and it gets pulled back by the spring inside into its resting position. If you have automatic air vents or even manual air vents in your airing cupboard or anywhere else in your system, you may want to open those up as well. So here I'm just going to unscrew the cap and remove it, and then that will let the air go into the system. That's providing it's actually working and not blocked up. Right, that's about it then. So I do hope my video has been helpful and you've been able to drain your system down without any problems. If you want to know a different way of draining your system, obviously I made a video and click on that link just there. If you want to know how to change a radiator valve without even draining your system, you can click on that link just there. As usual, please give me a little bit of feedback by clicking on subscribe, clicking on the old thumbs up, and of course share it with anyone who may be interested. And a cup of coffee in my toolbox fund is always really appreciated. Bye for now, and I hope to see you in the next video.